too. I like too much that you are here, and you're so kind to have together this interview. That will be very useful for us and for me. I was wondering, which was your first encounter with EFT, and what was that intrigued you about its model?
Right. Well, when I think about my first encounter with EFT, I think back to I think the real first encounter was my childhood, like growing up, believing in Carl Rogers' basic view in the limitless good in every human being. Mm-hmm. So in a way, this sounds like I'm not quite answering your question because I'm going back to my roots. But I just remember as a child thinking there's no bad people in the world. They are, people are ending up in jail or on death row because they haven't had a base. They haven't had the love they needed, right? So I think also growing up with a brother with a disability, I just sort of had this protective, fierce kind of like, people are all good, just give them a chance, right? Yes. So that when I started my counseling training in the late 70s, my first paper that I had to write was, did we believe, or how did we feel about Carl Rogers' approach to counseling and his argument that the 3 core conditions were enough, that they were necessary and sufficient. So I wrote this passionate paper arguing that, yes, if you could provide unconditional positive regard, empathic understanding, and genuineness from the therapist, that would be enough to help people with the change that they wanted. So I sort of right from the start had this passion for experiential therapies and the power of communicating empathic understanding and hearing the core emotion, evoking emotion. So that was kind of my soapbox and my passion before I ever heard of EFT or before EFT was even started, right? That was where I came from. And then also I developed this, because I was committed to experiential therapies and teaching experiential therapies when I started teaching counseling, I was very drawn to the work on emotion, that is a part that Les Greenberg and Jeremy Safran were doing, and that it's a part of the beginnings of EFT, right? Emotion as a process, not just about feelings, but a feeling, meaning, action process. Mm-hmm. So those things were all a part of what I was valuing. And then I first heard Sue Johnson speak in, probably it was in the 90s. Before she was doing these formal externship trainings, she was just kind of going around the country doing workshops on EFT.
So early.
Yeah, right. And so
you're from pioneers of EFT. So, right?
Well, I think back to, she actually started talking about they were doing these 5-day trainings in Ottawa. So it was I'm not quite sure when they started doing that. I took my externship in 2000, so I'm not sure. I think there had been a few before that, but back then they were 5 days, 5 long days. And I learned really from Sue Johnson about attachment theory and how attachment theory just expanded the Rogerian elements, because I didn't really, understand attachment theory before as a way of normalizing. That all behaviors make sense when you understand them in terms of attachment, that everyone's looking for a secure connection. So I really grew from a basic, more of a narrow Rogerian view to an expanded view that Sue presents by integrating the experiential systemic with the experiential humanistic with the systemic. And that was new for me, to learn about the cycles of interaction, that our internal experience impacts the way we behave, and the way we behave impacts how we feel. Relationships, the inner and the outer have this cyclic impact, and people get stuck in those patterns. So that was all new and expansive to my learning of EFT. And then I was thinking, when I thought about this question that you were going to ask me, I was thinking too that my own difficult experience in my first marriage contributed to my appreciating of EFT, because we went to numerous therapists who, I think they tried to teach us communication skills and stuff that doesn't really work. And what it ended up doing was them kind of pathologizing my ex-husband. So I know they were well-meaning, but they had a mixture of Rogerian, catharsis, and skill teaching. So of course that didn't help. They didn't know that we were stuck in negative patterns. And so just EFT gives us this non-pathologizing way of helping people find effective paths towards change. And I just, I'm drawn to it from many directions. So it was the little ways I found out were going to workshops that Sue Johnson did here and there, and then finally doing the externship, and then doing supervision.
This is when you apply EFIT, there are some differences from EFT for couples.
I think that, the biggest difference is the obvious one, that when you're working with an individual, you don't have the other physically in the room.
Yeah.
And yet the dyadic relational aspect isn't different, right? So that even when you're working only with an individual, all the other people in that person's life are present in some way, right? So they're not physically present, and the others that you might be working with are even, they may no longer be alive, they may not be in the person's life, or they may not be appropriate to have in the therapy room, but yet we are still together. We're tracking, mirroring how people get caught in patterns of interacting. So we're doing that whether we have one client or whether we have a couple. With the couple, we're tracking the process between the two of them.
Yeah.
With the individual, we're tracking the process of emotion. What's the trigger? They see a dead animal on the road, and immediately it triggers them into this panic attack. And in their panic attack, their whole body freezes or gets wound up. They get caught up in obsessive behaviors of ruminating and compulsive going back and checking. They start adopting all these animals, and then they've got all these underlying fears that they haven't accessed yet. All these underlying grief about deaths, or I'm just thinking of a particular example, but there's so much more going on. But until you can track the process of how do you manage emotion that's bothering you, well, I try to push it aside and I just carry on, and I try to save all the animals that are dying. So that's one way that individuals, when we work with an individual, we track what's the trigger, what's the body, how does the body respond, what are the meanings you make, how do you cope, how do you interact with others. So we're tracking that with an individual. Oh, this is how you interact with others. I cut them out. I don't even bother with them. I just put all my focus on these other activities, and I'm cutting people out, and I'm isolating from everyone. So as we work with that person and their interpersonal cycles, whatever they are, we're able to help them access their underlying emotions. And from those underlying emotions, from the core emotions that are driving people that they have avoided, comes what they need for change. They can begin to form new ways of interacting. You say, oh yeah, I can face my fears, I can face my grief, I can face my guilt, because you have a safe base with the partner, with the therapist. Just like in couple therapy with the partner, you help people share their fears. You help people share their fears with one another and have those hold me tight conversations, right? Where they can no longer send these unclear messages of blaming and withdrawing. They can get to the point where they say, yeah, just before I blame you, I'm terrified. I'm terrified that you never really want me or you're going to stay with me. So we help people in individual therapy reprocess that emotion and find a new way to respond. So that is like couple therapy. And even if it's a situation where someone is estranged from their son, right? And they're not in the therapy room, but their biggest struggle is that they're presenting to you is their estrangement from their son. and they are able in that session to get to the point that they may speak to an image of their son. They may sit there with their eyes closed and they may say these things to their son that they've never said. And they start to experience it differently. They may speak about, I actually miss you. Right? When they first start talking to me, they'll say, I don't even miss him anymore, like, he doesn't want to have anything to do with me, isn't happy with me, that's okay, I'm just keeping the boundaries, no way. But then as we start to process their experience, they're like, I am missing this person. And this is what I'd like to say to him. And maybe that's that person, their son will never be in their life again. Maybe they've died, maybe they've written them off. But it changes the person's experience to speak to that image of their estranged person, because it becomes an empowering experience. It starts to shift their view of self and other. And that's what we're doing in EFT, and that's what makes EFT different than a lot of other approaches, is that the focus is not on what's maladaptive in what you're doing. It's the focus is on what is the core emotion. It's adaptive, let's listen to it, let's help you reprocess that experience so that you have new ways of relating.